This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everybody. This is Diana Zinal with the Franklin County Chamber of Commerce. This week, the end of June, is when we normally hold our annual meeting and our annual legislative breakfast. And of course, for all the reasons everyone understands, we can't do that in person, but we felt it was really important to still connect with our impressive Franklin County delegation, all of whom are joining us here. I know that you can see Rep. Whip, Senator Comerford, Senator Hines, Rep. Blay, and we are joined by phone by Representative Mark. So first of all, thank you so much to all of you for being here. We really appreciate it. One of the things I love about this breakfast is we have an opportunity to hear from each of you about your own priorities and your thoughts on maybe what's happening in Boston, certainly how it affects Western Mass. It also gives us some time to show some appreciation to all of you because God knows we do. You guys are really terrific. We are so blessed to have the delegation that we have. So, first and foremost, a heartfelt thank you for the work you do during normal times, but what you've been asked to do during the last few months is really just been, you guys have risen to the occasion in really wonderful and comforting ways. So we really appreciate that. I'd like to start by giving each of you a chance to say something as we would at the breakfast. Rep. Mark, I'd like to start with you. You're the chair of redistricting. And of course, the census was extended. So I thought it'd be really important to hear from you, not only about everything on your mind, but particularly the census.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Diana, for putting this together. Obviously, it's sad to not be at the breakfast. It's one of my, actually, believe it or not, it's actually one of my favorite events of the year. And it's a time I usually try out some of my jokes and that kind of thing. And it's usually really, really enjoyable event. So
I know it would be better with a view and bacon, but here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And thank you for letting me call in. I tried to use the GoToMeeting, but it doesn't work for me on my phone. So for people that don't know, Paul Mark, 2nd Berkshire District, I live in the town of Peru, which is one of those towns, and there's many of them in Western Massachusetts, that still doesn't have 100% internet service or cell phone service. So as the coronavirus, this pandemic has been changing people's lives and making people have to work remotely, it's been extra difficult for people, I think, in the hill towns where to get service, I have to go drive somewhere and get in my car, and it's a hassle, but we do what we got to do to get by. So thank you for having us here. And as you mentioned, I chair the redistricting committee, and the redistricting committee is literally charged with redrawing the lines of the House, the Senate, the Governor's Council, and the U.S. House of Representatives next year. And to do that, we need to get the census numbers. And so we've been following the U.S. Census that is happening right now. We've been following it for the last couple of years and anticipating it. And we had a big kickoff April 1st last year, 2019, in Framingham. It was a statewide kickoff for 1 year of action to really make sure people understood how important the census was and to get ready, because the official census date is April 1st, 2020. And then as we were getting down to the home stretch, we got into March, and all of a sudden the pandemic hit and state of emergency was declared and everything was changed. And so the census remains important. I'll talk a little bit about why it's important. Obviously, it's important in terms of political power, as we mentioned. Redistricting and reapportionment of Congress is done by the census numbers. And so the numbers, we have to take 160 representative districts. We take the total population of Massachusetts divided by 160. That's how you know how many people you need to have in your representative district. Do the same thing for the Senate, divide by 40 though, and then in Congress, of course, we divide by 9. The House reapportions. The House is set at 435 members in Washington. They take a formula, they look at how the population has grown in each state, and they plug this formula in, and it spits out what state gets how many members of Congress. And so the good news, before the pandemic, the numbers we were following, it looked like Massachusetts was in good shape, that we weren't going to lose a member of Congress. We were growing at a rate of over 5% the population. But then, of course, there's always a bad news for us in Western Massachusetts. That population growth was really driven by what's happening out east. And out east in the Boston area, the growth in Suffolk County was 11.8%. Over 70,000 people had moved into just Boston. And in Franklin County, we were looking at actually a decline of about 0.5%. In Berkshire County, we were looking at a decline of like 3.7%. Hampshire, I think, was growing 2%, maybe a little bit less. And so when you look at that growth, that means that the growth in the eastern part of the state is going to drive some of the districts out there. They're going to get smaller. And meanwhile, the districts out west, of course, and down the Cape is in the same situation as us, congressional districts 1, 2, and 9. We're looking at growing our districts in terms of the amount of towns we have to pick up. So, I have 16 communities right now. Senator Hines has 52. I mean, those numbers could be 25. They could be 70. Sorry, Adam. And, we use the census numbers for that. And so we want to make sure that the count we get is as accurate as possible, because Franklin County, we're already growing very slowly or in decline in most places. And so not getting the count, really affects our voice in both Boston and in Washington and even in the Electoral College. But that's not the only reason the census is important. It's also important in terms of funding. And so this is pre-COVID. $675 billion in federal money is allocated by the census numbers. And there are hundreds of state and federal programs that the money that we receive is allocated by what the census numbers say. And so the estimate is that each person that doesn't fill out their census, you actually cost your community $2,300 a year for the next 10 years. So $23,000 over the life of the census. And when the census happens, it's required under the Constitution. It has happened every 10 years since 1790. And so if the numbers we get now in 2020 are wrong, those are the numbers we're stuck with until 2030. And so when COVID hit, the census was supposed to be completely finished by July 31st of this year. And instead, a lot of the operations were delayed. So the initial mailings of the invitations to respond, everyone should have received them by now. But that being said, they were sent out in waves. And so if you happen to be in a place that was part of the fourth wave, then when the delay went into effect of the field operations, yours might not have been mailed in March as it should have been. So if you're just getting your invitation to respond right now, that's okay. If you live in a house, and this is relevant in some of the rural communities especially, if you live in a house where you don't get mail delivered to your house, where you have to go to a box like down the street or in the middle of the neighborhood, or I know in the Berkshires anyway, there's towns where basically the entire town goes to the P.O. box at the post office. If you're one of those households, a census enumerator has to come to your door and drop off the invitation to respond. That should be happening. Those operations began again in June, the delayed timeline. So if you haven't received this yet, don't worry. You should be receiving it soon. But just in case, you can go on census2020.gov and you can fill it out now regardless. They changed the way the website is set up. So if you haven't received your invitation and you don't have that unique code, there's still a way to go on. If you do receive the invitation, it's great. They want people to respond online. That is the best way to do it. The self-response rate in Massachusetts is over 60%. We're actually beating the rest of the country, which is a really good sign. I know Greenfield was doing really well in terms of compared to other municipalities around the state. So that was a good sign as well. The delayed operations, so field operations have begun. Some of the door-to-door work has begun now. There'll be more of that in July and into August, and the deadline to respond was actually shifted all the way till October 31st. So there is still time to do it yourself, to encourage your friends, your family, your neighbors, and as part of community groups or different associations, take the time to encourage people to respond. It's really important. The legislature, we put $3.5 million. We made it available for grants for the Secretary of State, Bill Galvin, to distribute. He delayed the timeline for distribution, so that money is still going to flow. And obviously, that was a good thing because it means the money can flow and adapt to the needs as we, as the world has changed. They can adapt the protocol and they can adapt where the grants are going to go to make sure that under the new reality that, we get everybody counted. So thank you again for inviting us all here, and thank you for asking me to talk about the census because it is extremely important. And I thought I'd be done talking about it by now, but apparently I'm going to be talking about it all the way to Halloween, and there will be more days of action coming up, and I'll be sure to let people know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Mark. So next, I would love to hear from the representative who represents towards the eastern portion of Franklin County, and that's Representative Susanna Whips. Hi, Susanna. It's so good to see you.
Good morning. It's good to see you and all of my colleagues. It's been a long time since we've been together, and I miss seeing them. One of the things that I've been focused on throughout this COVID pandemic is food insecurity in the region. COVID-19 dramatically increased food insecurity in Massachusetts, with over 1 million people unemployed right now in Western Massachusetts. 1 in 7 people have food insecurity, and as much as 1 in 4 children are food insecure. And that's something that's really, troubling to all of the members of our delegation. We are really grateful that prior eligibility made it possible for most children in our region to get a free breakfast and lunch delivered or picked up at their schools. That's been tremendous. And with the school year now ending, all of those children who are eligible for free breakfast and lunch will have received a PEBT card. It's a pandemic EBT card that can be used at the grocery store. A lot of folks in my region have reached out to me and said, well, we're okay right now. What can we do with it? The cards are not transferable. You can't donate them, but you certainly can shop and donate that food to a food pantry, which is what a lot of my constituents have been doing. Food pantries locally are doing a tremendous job. So any help you can give, if that card is not something your family's reliant on right now, we encourage people to consider shelf-stable milk and other items that can go to a food pantry. The kids, school is generally the safest place, and for a lot of kids, it's where they get their hot meals. So the school staff that has worked to make sure that packages were delivered or available for pickup for the kids have done a tremendous job. All of the delegation that's on this call today are members of our Food System Caucus at the State House. It's the largest caucus at the State House. It's bipartisan and bicameral, and we've been meeting regularly throughout this, remotely of course, to discuss some of the issues regarding food insecurity and the whole food system and what we can do for our farmers. Prior to COVID-19, our region did have a bit of food insecurity and things we had been working on, but as COVID began, we started to realize there were a few barriers for people to get assistance. SNAP and WIC federal programs, people generally had to go to an office with their children to re-up their WIC or to get attention. That's something that the Food System Caucus worked on to allow people to do that remotely for the safety of the workers as well as the families. Prior to COVID, food delivery wasn't available to SNAP recipients. Again, that was a federal decision, but it's something the Food System Caucus advocated for to make sure that people who are unable, and especially living in areas like ours where there is a lack of public transportation in many of the smaller towns, where they can actually get food delivered to them, which is a huge help. HIP, which is something we all talk about, the Healthy Incentives Program, recently received an infusion of $5 million. HIP is available to every SNAP beneficiary, and they can use that specifically at farmers markets, co-ops, which I know Paul and I go back and forth between the Greenfield Co-op and the Quabbin Harvest Co-op in Orange as far as who has the most enrollees with regards to that. And that's an encouragement of purchasing healthy food and fruits for people. And it also helps our local farmers because we're helping people get that healthy food, and then it's local farmers that are providing it. They could buy it at farmers markets. There's some pop-up mobile markets around, and then our local co-ops, which the $5 million is huge for us right now. I mentioned our local food pantries a little while ago. They are doing tremendous work. I stop at 1 or 2 of them every week to check on folks, and one thing their messaging is they're safe. You're more, you can pull up, they put right in your trunk, The food is safe. The employees, they're always masked, and please take advantage of it. They're seeing more and more people, and they do encourage you to come in. They've made it a lot easier for folks. And a thank you to all of the volunteers. I know all of my colleagues will echo that, you know, the folks who are on the front lines, making sure that our neighbors are being cared for and receiving food is tremendous. Also, Life Path with Meals on Wheels. So many seniors depend on congregate meals and meal sites just for the ability to visit with people as well as get a healthy meal. Meals on Wheels has picked up delivery for all of those folks who were going to the congregate site. So again, so many people working to make sure that our neighbors are taken care of. And throughout this pandemic, I'm just going to wrap up saying I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't say, thank God we live in Massachusetts. I mean, the whole philosophy of us being a Commonwealth and looking out for each other and caring about each other, I don't think that's been evidenced any better ever than it has during this pandemic. And just very grateful today for all of the people in our communities and those who are trying to help everybody be safe and navigate through this. So I thank you. I encourage everybody, if you can, to donate to your local food pantries.
Thank you so much. And, you know, I've been watching your posts. You're actually even helping fill fruit baskets and everything on a regular basis. Really helping both at the legislative level and right down at the food packing level. But, you know, and also you mentioned farming and how that all fits in here. You know, I know that there's been some really interesting farm collaboratives that have come out of this as well. So that's an exciting development in light of this really difficult time. So Susanna, thank you so much for.
Thank you for hosting us, Diana. I appreciate it.
So next, Representative Blais, 2nd Franklin District, correct? 1st Franklin District, sorry. And we're just so glad to have you here. For people who don't know, Rep. Blais had my job before she ran for the House, so she's very familiar with everything that the Chamber does and a real champion for the Chamber, so we appreciate that. Thanks, Natalie. What are you up to?
Well, I just want to thank you, Diana, for pulling this together. I also want to thank Marion and Lisa for all you're doing. Marion and Lisa, if you're watching this, thanks for being there to meet the needs of the Franklin County Chamber community as we deal with these difficult times. It's so good to see all of you here today. And as you can see, your legislative delegation continues to work really hard on behalf of all of the constituents in our districts, whether it's in our bedrooms or basements or living rooms or dining rooms. We're still here, and I think it's important to reiterate that you can call us at any time. We've received a number of calls about unemployment insurance, food assistance, housing assistance, questions or feedback on the reopening plan. You know, any of those things that you want to talk with us about, just know that you can email us or call us on any of those points, and we remain here working for you. With that said, I know that many people right now are concerned about the local economy and how we're going to bounce back from the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are a number of areas that we need to focus on in order to ensure that our rural communities are not left behind as we look to stimulate economic growth across our Commonwealth. Some of these areas include agriculture, housing, small business assistance, workforce development. There are a number of pieces of our economy that are very specific to our rural communities and differ from our urban counterparts. So we want to make sure that we're advocating for those programs and policies that really support our small rural economies. I'm really grateful for the work of the Franklin Regional Economic Development Initiative and to the Rural Policy Advisory Commission for pulling together a list of those programs and policies and advocating for those with leadership in the House and Senate. One of those areas is agriculture. And as Rep Whip said so well, and has been such a strong fighter for a lot of these programs, we have to protect programs like the Healthy Incentives Program, or HIP. This program incentivizes SNAP recipients to buy local, healthy, fresh food. It's incredibly successful and also provides support for our local farmers markets and our farms. Another important program is the Massachusetts Emergency Food Assistance Program, MEFAP, which provides food to local food banks, with some of it coming from our local farms. We have to continue to protect the dairy tax credit, and I would love to see, there's a bill pending that would provide a tax deduction for charitable donations of food by farmers. These are all things that we can be supporting in the legislature that will also support our economy. And as Rep. Paul Mark noted, he knows all too well, when it comes to infrastructure, we need to ensure that we are making progress towards universal broadband access. We had powerful testimony given before the committee by Chamber member Kim Stevens from Hager's Farm. She talked about what it's like to how our educational opportunities are impacted by the lack of infrastructure every day, but particularly as we adjust to life during the COVID-19 pandemic. So that infrastructure is absolutely necessary as we look to restart the rural economy. And we cannot continue to have people conducting business, teaching classes, or taking classes in their cars, in parking lots, in our unserved and underserved communities. So I'm grateful to be working with this entire delegation who are really pushing to make sure that those connections are made. And Diane, as you noted, there have been a number of really innovative collaborations that have come out of this pandemic and have really proven how much we value our small businesses here in Western Massachusetts. And they are the backbone of our economy. And we are doing our part, and we have to continue to do our part by doing the curbside pickup if it's available, by purchasing gift cards. And as we progress on reopening Massachusetts, the support will become increasingly important. We've always said it, but I don't know that it's ever been more important than now to please buy local and support your local businesses. And I just want to echo what Rep. Mark and Rep. Whips have said already, that something I hear when I'm out at annual town meetings right now is how grateful people are to be living in these communities, because people have really stepped up to support one another. And it's a really special place to be right now. And I'm grateful for our community support. I'm grateful for you, Diana, and everything that the Chamber is doing to support our local businesses, and look forward to continuing to work with you. And thank you for pulling this together. I wish we were having breakfast and great coffee and bacon and everything else. And just seeing all of the wonderful faces that are in the Chamber community. So thank you for being here today and doing this.
Thank you so much. I know the legislative breakfast is one of our larger breakfasts, most popular for obvious reasons. People really feel it's important to connect with all of you. So next year we'll be in person.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it already.
I know. Senator Comerford is with us, and goodness, what a job you've had lately, because you are the chair of the Senate Working Group on COVID-19. Wow. I know. Great choice, by the way, for you to do that. And, you and I have had the opportunity to speak several times through this in a variety of different groups. And I know how hard you've been working on so many different things. So I'm really glad for your time today. And I'd love to hear an update from you on things that are happening with that working group, and, obviously any other priorities you have.
Thank you so much. So first, Diana, thank you for your leadership. It has been evident from moment one, the way that you've helped us leverage our work on behalf of Franklin County, and the way that you've led the Chamber so beautifully. So thank you, thanks to your team. And I just want to pile on with love for this delegation. I'm really grateful to lock arms with all of you, and also just echo again what my colleagues have said about the extraordinary response from this community, our municipalities, our businesses, individuals, both civic and civil and nonprofit, for-profit sectors have just put their shoulder to the wheel of this crisis, both the pandemic and the economic crisis. And I'm just honored to represent Franklin County with all of you and to work on its behalf. It's a remarkable place. So as you noted, Diana, I have, as Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on Public Health, I was appointed by the Senate President to lead the COVID-19 response. So we've been doing that. Our team has been doing that and have sort of split our time, if you will, between that the work that's been embodied in that Senate response and our own responsibility here in the region. So with regard to the Senate Working Group, there are 9 senators. Each of us took hubs of work. For example, Senator Eric Lesser did an economic development hub. I took the safety net hub, and we've all split ourselves into these working groups. And through these working groups, we've done a number of things. We've advised the Senate President, because being in the state of emergency, she is in direct connection with the governor many times a week, and the governor is taking action in the state of emergency from the executive often. And so the Senate President and also the Minority Leader, Bruce Tarr, who's also on the Senate Working Group, have been bringing critical issues to these calls, to these meetings, and helping leverage what the Senate believes should happen. So that's been one area. So we've been advising the Senate President and the Senate Minority Leader through the executive actions. We've also been working on a lot of budget priorities. The Senate and the full legislature, along with the executive, have been spending money through this crisis in rather non-traditional, sometimes quick moving, sometimes not easily accessible through the public ways, but getting money to our community health centers, our hospitals, redistributing pots of money to be able to better respond as a Commonwealth. So we've been doing that. We are also fully engaged on a supplemental budget, which is forthcoming, also in the fiscal year 21 budget, which is also forthcoming, although not yet fully understood in terms of the timeline. And we've been working on legislation. So we've pushed out a lot of different legislation focused on housing security, both for owners and renters, unemployment insurance, municipally focused legislation, cash benefit legislation, and more. And that's been our job to wrangle and to pool resources in the Senate on behalf of this work to try to make it as quick, as most strategic and quick moving as possible. Regionally, and here at home and then in Boston, on behalf of the district, like Rep. Blais said, I think beautifully, we work for you here in Franklin County. And so we've been serving constituents as individuals, businesses, municipalities on a range of issues. And I'll actually just take a moment to say that at senatorjoecomerford.org, there is a constituent guide with a whole lot of links that Sam Hopper from our team updates every day. And they're everything from individual unemployment insurance to resources for businesses and also lots of municipality resources. And if you don't see it there and you need our help, we want to hear from you, absolutely. I know Adam's going to talk to this, Senator Hines is going to talk to this, but also as part of the reopening, which he's been leading for the Senate, I've been engaged with Senator Cindy Friedman on Senate listenings, and we're going to do one on healthcare and public health. And why this is important is that the administration has said that the reopening will be data, not date driven. And I support that, right? I want a good mixture of public health indicators and also some economic indicators to help chart our way forward. And so Senator Friedman and I are doing a listening session later on in the month, June 29th. And it's going to focus both on the public health infrastructure, so contact tracing, testing, and the plans out here. And the delegation has been very mindful the whole way through this crisis about regional equity. And so certainly I'm going to be thinking about that, and also the rural public health infrastructure and its availability to rise to the challenges of reopening in equitable ways. We're also going to talk about things like the well-being of our hospitals, our community health centers, our nursing homes. And really understand these next plans. So people will take note that the administration has now had different phases of support for nursing homes, for example, and we want to interrogate and understand the next phases and help inform them on behalf of the Senate. And then finally, I'll just say quickly that the Senate President asked me to serve on the Senate's Task Force Advisory Group on Racial Justice. And in the wake of the real tragedies that have happened across our nation, and the concerns that are here with us in Western Massachusetts, I'm honored to do that work on behalf of our district, and of course in solidarity with many of our senators who are also on that advisory group. And we're looking at a range of racial equity legislative paths forward, which hopefully we're going to be able to roll out in quick order to respond to the crisis responsibly on behalf of the Senate. And lastly, I'll just say that even as we are in the midst of this crisis and the reopening, it's not lost on any of us, as you've heard, that we need to reach back, if you will, to the time before COVID. And even as we build back, so hopefully stronger, better, more equitably going forward, learning all the lessons that we did from some of the ways that the response to COVID was inequitable. So I want to build back better than we were before. We're also needing to rekindle the work that was happening before COVID. And so that work looks like restarting a push around Route 2 rail and the study that was promised to our region, really thinking about water sewer infrastructure with Rep. Blay, and other pieces of work that we have to basically rekindle now in the wake of COVID. And I look forward to doing that work with all of you. So thanks so much for the time, and really deeply grateful, Diana, that you pulled us together.
Thank you so much. That was a lot. You mentioned a lot in there. That was really terrific. I appreciate it, Senator Comerford. Last but certainly not least, we have our friend from the Berkshires, Senator Hines, who does have some Western Franklin County towns. And we're so happy to have you here, Adam. Excuse me, and would love to hear from you again on your priorities.
Great, thanks, Diana, and thanks again for pulling this together. It's wonderful to be with colleagues, and you can get a sense of the energy and kind of the force with which we're grappling with the big regional issues. You're right, I cover the 9 westernmost towns in Franklin County, including the one I grew up in Buckland, where my parents still live, and so that's one reason why I always look forward to this event and the work of the chamber. It's one of the cruel ironies of dealing with a pandemic that it's precisely in a moment of a crisis when you want to be with community members and supporting each other and physically proximate, and of course this is not possible. So thanks for at least making sure we're working together through Zoom. As you heard from Senator Comerford, one of the things that we've been focusing on, I've been appointed to be the Senate designee on reopening, and so we started a series of listening sessions 2 Fridays ago on economic development and labor, and then we're moving forward with Senator Comerford's on public health and healthcare financing. We'll also have one on childcare, another on elder care, mental health, and how to achieve an equitable reopening. And honestly, with one under our belt, it's both helpful to say, okay, where are the pinch points in this process? We're trying to identify, are there gaps with how the administration has gone about this? Are there, certain executive orders that should stay in place? One great example is how have we been dealing with telehealth and telemedicine, and we've kind of taken a leap forward in certain areas, and what do we want to do to preserve those? And then finally, in the new normal, what do we need to do differently, and how does that impact our policies and our legislation? It's been pretty scary, to be quite honest, to hear the dramatic impact that our retailers are facing, our restaurateurs are facing, our workers are facing. And so I honestly come today both deeply concerned about the length of this recession and trying to find glimmers of hope. And when it comes to the concern, we're keeping an eye on the fact that if the federal government doesn't do something soon, we're going to have a whole range of federal assistance kind of sunsetting. And that results in hundreds of millions of dollars of influx of cash into the Commonwealth through unemployment insurance and a whole range of other business assistance. And so one question becomes, okay, what do we do to either protect ourselves as a Commonwealth in the incident that in the case when that doesn't happen, or what do we need to do in the next phase in any event, i.e., okay, we can open, and as of today, restaurants can have people inside. What if nobody comes through that door once it's open? We're looking at a pretty significant shift in many respects in our economy. And I read a report by UBS, so I guess a bank and financial services. They said that in the Great Recession, about 20,000 retailers closed their doors. And they expect in this recession, 100,000 retailers will close their doors. So there's a real need to be conscious of what does this mean about just the fundamental shifts taking place, and how do we change as a result of that. One of the big pieces is certainly going to be things like childcare, and making sure that workers can choose to go back to work when they're called to go back to the workplace. And it's also an example of the fundamental changes in the new normal. If we have guidances that say capacity has to be half of what it is, what does that do for a business model that says we need X number of participants to make ends meet? And so that's just one example. Restaurants, I think, are confronted with the same question. And so, those are the range of issues that we're trying to be very clear on as we're preparing state assistance or a whole range of policy challenges. I'd say, in the category of what could be an interesting outcome of this is, I've mentioned a few of the negative accelerating trends towards things like online sales for retailers. I call it negative because it seems to only take away from our Main Street retailers. But there have also been some of these other accelerants that I mentioned. So moving forward, a leap forward in telemedicine, putting aside for a second all the challenges around accessibility via cell phone or internet. But there are some really interesting changes happening there. The other one is remote working. We've seen surveys from associations, business associations that are statewide, and saying that pretty significant numbers of employers are deciding to keep a large portion of people from working from home. And so what does that mean for Franklin County? I personally think it means it's an opportunity to flatten or reverse any population trends, as people can say, well, wait a second, this pandemic opened my eyes to the fact that I don't necessarily want to be surrounded by folks and taking the tea every single day. If I can have that salary and live in Franklin County, why not? And make sure my kids have good schools and the like, and access to nature. And so I think there's something that we really need to be proactive in marketing and preparing for. And so that's something that I would put in the category of a reason why we need to double down on our investments in outdoor recreation and a whole range of implications. I'll just wrap up by noting that I'm also the chair of revenue. And so we're, as you've heard alluded to, we're very quickly hitting the end of the fiscal year at the end of the month. And the visibility on how we're going to bridge that gap to the next fiscal year is only now starting to emerge. We've been waiting months, literally, to understand what the federal next federal package might be, because that's clearly the biggest player for us filling that gap. You've seen all the estimates that we think we're $6 billion shorter than what we thought we were going to have for this fiscal year. And so we're doing the work of saying, how do you fill that gap so that we can make sure our schools are at a minimum held harmless, and same with local aid. What do we do about our local aid and the like? I'm someone who believes that there's no way we should be cutting our way out of this recession. There's, schools and, the state and local governments are the biggest employer in the Commonwealth. And if we start slicing away teachers, police officers, firemen, is that really going to be the way that we find our way to a kind of a stable regional economic kind of posture coming through a recession? I think the reality is no. And so there are a lot of interesting ideas on the table of how we get there. Clearly, the federal government, if it comes through with the HEROES Act that the House passed, is the best way to get through. We would be sitting quite well for the next fiscal year. fiscal 2022 is probably still a concern in that scenario. But there are a lot of interesting ideas on the table that we're all grappling with right now. And that includes, for example, the governor put new revenue on the table in H2. The House has put a lot of revenue on the table in a transportation revenue bill, and the Senate is kind of considering what would be next in that regard. And so it's time for an update in a lot of ways that we go about our budgeting and our revenue collection, and that's become even more apparent now in a crisis like this. So those are just a few of the things we're grappling with right now, and maybe I'll cut myself off so we can have a conversation.
Well, thank you so much, Adam, for all of that. I really, really appreciate it, and it's reassuring to hear, the commitment to making sure that municipalities and particularly school districts are still getting their funding. I also wear the hat of being on a select board, the select board in my town, and it's daunting for us to think about what might happen if there's significant cuts there, and how that just filters through through everything, how we can provide services to seniors and the fire department and the school department and all of that. So that's really great. Both you, Senator Hines, and Paul, who we may have lost. Paul, are you still there? No, I think we lost Paul.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Yeah. Okay, sorry. You both touched on something that has been on my mind a lot, and that is the potential migration to more rural areas. We're already hearing that's a possibility, and anecdotally, I'm hearing from actually my two older kids, and I know that some of their friends, they're all in their 20s, are starting to realize, like, maybe this is where we really want to stay, which is really terrific news. And I do think that there'll be, some interest in moving out this way. And I know that all of you are really committed to East-West Rail, which we talked about a little bit, but I think that that's going to be a really important component of that, the ability of people to be able to do that. So that was something I just wanted to mention. And then the other thing that, I've been thinking about, I really want to commend, all of you are just so terrific, but you also have really great staff. And I can't imagine what it's been like to be a legislative staff person. As you know, I'm sympathetic to this, having been a legislative staff person for a very, very long time. And I can tell you that what they have been asked to do lately, as Joe, you mentioned it a little bit, helping people with unemployment claims, and people really worried about things very specific to their lives. So I really want to commend you, because you all have terrific staff, and they've been really responsive to anything I've needed through this, and I know they have been to constituents, and it's worth mentioning because they're working really hard. And so today is really an exciting day, because we're entering stage 2 of phase 2, and some businesses can open, which makes me so incredibly happy. Whew. And we're getting some retail back, some personal services can start up today, certainly the restaurants that can open with their limited capacities. It's feeling a little bit like there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, as long as we do this in a very cautious and responsible way, so that we don't have any setbacks, because we are seeing really good numbers. So I have to say that I think that the way that it's been, that we've been moving through it, feels good to me, and I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing around that. I think that some people are really ready to get back to these businesses and really ready to support local businesses. I know I am, and it's really so important that we do that right now.
Diana,
did anybody want to? Yes.
I'm going to jump in on that just super quickly. Part of what Secretary Mary Lou Sudders has said numerous times, and also Secretary Keneally, right? Both of them from different sides, right? One from the healthcare side, one from the economic development side, have said, and I think it's important for us to underscore it here, it is imperative that we follow public health guidelines as we reopen our economy. So take these, take the mandates around mask wearing really seriously. Take the mandates around washing your hands really seriously. Stay home when you feel sick. Testing is opening up for asymptomatic folks as well as symptomatic folks. So, we'll have more testing in our region for folks to get clear about whether or not they've been exposed to COVID or they themselves are carrying COVID. And I want to just underscore that, because we all want, I think, share an excitement about the potential of rekindling the economy and moving forward powerfully.
Mhm.
And the way that we'll be able to do that is that if we don't get a spike in COVID cases, we have to keep the curve down. In other places across the country, we see these numbers rising. And I will say that we don't want them to rise here. And we do want to move forward safely, both for our essential workers and for our families. Everybody deserves this. So it's up to all of us to really enforce these as employers and take them seriously as customers or participants in the economy.
That's an excellent point. One of the other things I do, in addition to this legislative breakfast in the last week of June, is I put the finishing touches on our grant application for our tourism grant through the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism. And that application looks a little different this year. And one of the things, that's sort of one of the things that we're grappling with. We think that actually tourists may have a little more interest in traveling locally, moving around within the state, maybe visiting some places that are a little nostalgic for them. They haven't been there in a while, a nice drive up Route 2, a day trip to Yankee Candle, all of the outdoor rec that we have up here, which Senator Hines referred to, which is just tremendous. The river and the hiking and the cycling is the best, in my opinion, in Massachusetts. And so we're working on how we attract visitors in a way that, again, is responsible, because so many of our businesses rely on the tourism industry. So we're working on that as well. And I think we may benefit a little bit from people not wanting to travel further or get on an airplane or, take these longer, further away vacations. And so we'll position ourselves to be ready to welcome travelers and tourists as I said, in a responsible and conscious way. So that's something that we're focusing on at the Chamber this week. And of course beyond, because I think that's something that's going to require a little bit of a shift, maybe even for a couple of years, how we market ourselves in terms of tourism. So I am so grateful to have all of you. Did anybody want to mention anything else? Or Paul, you've been quiet. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to pipe in on at all before we wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the point you made earlier is really great about, as people are able to telecommute and as telecommuting is encouraged, it's good that we've been doing the significant work we've been doing for the last 8 to 10 years on investing in broadband infrastructure, because, as this crisis is hitting and as more and more towns come online in Western Massachusetts, this is going to be a very attractive place for people to relocate to. And then all the work on improved rail and improved transit and transportation infrastructure for the area is also going to help. It's just, I've been saying this to people though for a long time, is once you get that broadband, we don't want to end up like the Cape Cod either. We don't want that out of town people, buy up all the properties here and local people can't buy anything either. So, have your zoning laws prepared accordingly if you're someone involved in a town government. And then what Joe was saying, as things reopen, and obviously we want successful business, we want people to be able to get back to work, but we don't want people to get back to work at the expense of people getting sick and people dying. And so as you reopen your business, please do so responsible. Make sure customers are doing so responsible. As you are a consumer, please continue to be responsible. This crisis is not over by any means. If you watch the data, the United States as a country has never actually started a decline. We're spiking. The spikes around most of the country right now are some of the worst they've been since this began. So, don't let your guard down. It's great. I've been having takeout. I've been doing things to try to boost local businesses since this began. But at the same time, I keep my quarantine very small, and I don't do things that aren't necessarily. And I'm just going to emphasize this because, boy, I can't believe it needs to be emphasized. Whether the crisis is going on or it's over, please wash your hands anyway, because it's just gross not to. Thank you.
Great advice from you. I would agree with that. That may be one of the things that comes from this. It's great is some more awareness of those types of things. So I am really just so grateful that you all gave me your time today, and of course, most importantly, for the ongoing work that you're doing. Natalie didn't mention, but she is on the Committee on Transportation, and so East-West Rail is something that she's been working on a lot, and the infrastructure improvements that will really, if we can get those projects going, both boost the economy and take care of some of the problems that we have out here with water, sewer, bridges, all of that stuff. So there's all these little pieces of the puzzle, but you all are putting them together beautifully and working really hard for all of us as usual. And we just appreciate it so much. I thank you so much for your time, and can't wait till I can see you all in person, because you're some of my favorite people, and I really miss seeing you. So again, thank you, and please keep up the good work. We're all just so grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Take care, everyone. We'll see you
Thank you.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.